The wind moves across a Colorado ridge in October. Cottonwoods bend. A dented milk tin sits on a general store counter under a shopkeeper's flat hand. Somewhere in that store, a baby cries once, just once, then quiets against the father's neck. At the back of the room, a woman in a dark coat does not lower her eyes. She has counted every person in the store. 8 of them. 8 pairs of eyes suddenly finding the floor interesting. 9 if you count her. And she's the 9th. Outside on the road, a carriage stops. A man leans out. He is smiling the way powerful men smile before they take what they want. The store goes silent. The kind of silent that changes what happens next. The tea was not the reason. The tea was the excuse. Cordelia Blackwood had woken at 4 in the morning on the 23rd of October. And she had known before her eyes opened what the date was. 19 years, that was the number. 19 years since a fever had walked into a small cottage on the North Ridge and taken her 4-year-old daughter out of the world in 72 hours. 19 years. She had not planned to leave the main house that morning. She had planned to sit in the study with the curtains drawn and pretend she was working through the ledgers, which was what she did every 23rd of October, which was what she had done for 18 previous years, which was, if she was being honest with herself, a form of drowning that she had learned to perform so well that nobody around her knew it was drowning anymore. Not even Prudence, who noticed most things. But this year something was different, and she could not name it, and she did not trust it. And by 7 in the morning, she had put on her coat and told Prudence she needed tea, which was a lie. There was tea in the pantry, enough tea to last through Christmas. Prudence had looked at her the way Prudence looked when she was choosing not to say the thing she was thinking, and had said, "The road is icy. Take the sorrel." Cordelia had taken the sorrel. She had ridden to town in the cold October air with the wind cutting across her face. And she had told herself with each half-mile of frozen ground that she was going to Pryor's store for tea. Not for anything else. Not for company. Not for anything as embarrassing as the desire to be around people who did not know what day it was. The bell above the door rang cheerfully when she pushed it open. She hated that bell. She had been in the back of the store for perhaps 10 minutes when the door opened again. A different ring, or the same ring but sounding different because of what walked in with it. A man, about her own height, maybe an inch shorter, carrying a baby against his chest in a sling made of canvas and old curtain fabric. The kind of sling a wife would have sewn. A wife who had spent her last months trying to solve problems she would not live to see solved. Cordelia knew a widowed man when she saw one. She had been one for 7 years. She could read it in a shoulder, in a coat with too many patches, in the way a man carried something small and warm against his ribs, as if the warmth were the only thing standing between him and a full collapse. Horace Pryor was behind the counter, making notes in his leather ledger. The way men make notes when they want the room to know that money is a serious business. "Mr. Pryor," the man said, "I need to talk to you about my account." "I know what you need to talk about." Pryor did not look up. "I'm behind, I know. I've been looking for work since the Dalton mine closed. I've had interviews. 2 of them said maybe by Friday. Maybe doesn't pay your tab, son." The baby made a small sound against the man's shoulder, not crying, just present, just there. Cordelia watched from the back of the store. She could see the whole thing. She could see the way the man shifted the baby to his other arm. She could see the way his fingers moved through the small tuft of hair on the child's head. Automatic, practiced. A man who had done this 1,000 times in the middle of 1,000 nights. Then Pryor came around the counter. Then Pryor said the thing. "Bring me what's left in the tin." The man hesitated. "It's half empty. Samuel's been." "I don't care if it's all empty. Bring me what's left and we'll settle the difference." The man's name Cordelia did not yet know, but she watched him reach into his coat with the slow deliberation of a person who had just been asked to hand over the last bone in his body. And she watched him pull out a dented milk tin. And she watched him place it in Horace Pryor's outstretched palm. That was when Pryor grabbed it. Not took. Grabbed. Yanked it away from the man's hand, the way a bully yanks something from a child. Slammed it on the counter so hard, the sound cracked through the store like a gunshot. The baby startled, cried, then quieted against his father's neck. "You think credit grows on trees, boy?" Cordelia did not move. "Return it, every penny, or I'll have the sheriff pull that baby right out of your worthless arms and hand him to someone who can actually feed him." The store went silent. The kind of silent that has weight. The kind of silent that makes the walls feel closer than they are. Cordelia counted. Not on purpose. She just counted because that was what her mind did in moments of stress. 8 people. 9 including her. 8 people in Horace Pryor's general store on the 23rd of October in the year 1888. And every single one of them found something else to look at. The 2 women near the dry goods turned back to their shopping. The clerk on the lower shelf became suddenly fascinated with a can of preserves. The man with the newspaper turned a page, and the woman in the good wool coat with silver hair and expensive gloves. The woman Cordelia recognized as Ophelia Whitcomb, wife of one of the bank directors. That woman lowered her eyes and studied the floor. 8 people. 8 pairs of eyes, suddenly discovering there was nothing worth seeing in the direction of the counter. Cordelia did not lower her eyes. She was not brave. She wanted the record to show that. She was not brave in any sense that a person of moral courage would recognize. She simply had spent the morning thinking about a small girl with dark curls who had died in a cottage 19 years ago. And she had come to Pryor's store because she could not be at home. And now she was watching a man in a coat with patched elbows be threatened with the loss of his baby over a tin of milk that could not possibly be worth more than 50 cents. And something in her, some tired 7-year-old widow part of her, said no. Not today. Not this one. She walked to the counter. She did not know she was going to do it until her feet had already moved. "Mr. Pryor." Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Something in the room shifted the way a horse shifts when it feels the barometric pressure drop. "Mrs. Blackwood." Pryor's tone changed, because he was not a stupid man, because he knew who paid for a quarter of his monthly revenue through the Blackwood Holdings supply account, because Cordelia Blackwood had walked into his store as a customer, and Cordelia Blackwood walking to the counter meant something different than a browser walking to the counter. She opened her small leather purse. She withdrew a folded bill. She placed it on the counter with one finger. "This gentleman's account," she said, "settled in full." The bill sat there. Pryor looked at it. He looked at her. He was running the calculation Cordelia had already run. She was giving him no way to argue that did not cost him money. "Mrs. Blackwood, that's very." "And 2 tins of that formula." She gestured at the shelf. "Have them wrapped, please." She turned then. She looked directly at the man with the baby. Not at the baby, at the man. "Is 2 sufficient for now?" she said. "Or would you prefer 3? The man's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "2, he said. "Ma'am, 2 is more than enough, but I don't." He stopped, started again. "I don't accept charity. I'm not offering it." She turned back to Pryor, who was wrapping the tins with the exaggerated care of a man who had discovered his hands were being watched by important people. "I'm offering employment," she said, "if that's agreeable to him." Then she waited. The man with the baby was staring at her. She could feel it. She kept her eyes on the wrapping paper as Pryor folded it around the tins. She had spent 7 years learning not to give people the satisfaction of watching her decide things. Decisions were made in private. Announcements were made in public. The gap between them was where a widow protected herself. "What kind of employment?" the man asked. She turned back to him. She told him about the property, the cottage that needed rebuilding, the orchard that had not been tended in 3 years, the fencing along the lower pasture, the laundry room that could be made habitable in 10 days, the woman on the property who would look after the baby. Her name was Prudence, and she had raised 4 children of her own, and Mrs. Blackwood would put that in writing if he needed it. She did not tell him the cottage was where her daughter had been born. She did not tell him the cottage was where her daughter had died. She did not tell him she had not opened the door of that cottage in 19 years. And she did not tell him that until that morning, until the moment her feet had walked her to Pryor's counter, she had believed she would never open it again. Some things you do not say to a stranger. Some things you barely say to yourself. There's also, she added, a right to purchase the property at the end of 3 years. For $1, legal deed, your name on it. She heard the 2 women near the dry goods turn. She heard the man with the newspaper set it down. She did not care. She was watching the man with the baby. He was watching her. "Why?" he asked. His voice was quiet. "Because I need the work done," she said. "And you need work to do. Those 2 facts don't require a more complicated explanation than that." "That's not an answer." Something almost moved in her face. Not a smile. Nothing so simple as a smile. "No," she said. "It isn't." She picked up the wrapped tins. She held them out to him. "I'll be at the North Ridge property at 8 tomorrow morning. If you come, bring the boy. If you don't come, then I suppose Mr. Pryor's generosity will have to suffice." She walked out. The bell above the door rang. Cheerful, indifferent. The same sound it made when anybody left. Outside on the wooden boardwalk, Nathaniel Halloran stood in the October cold and held his son and tried to remember how breathing worked. 4 cents in his coat pocket. 2 tins of formula in his arms, a promise from a stranger. He looked down at Samuel. The boy was awake now, studying him with the solemn attention very small children reserve for their fathers. Samuel had his mother's eyes, Winifred's eyes, gray and steady and a little too old for a face that had only been in the world 7 months. "Sam," Nathaniel said quietly, "I don't know what just happened." Samuel made a sound that might have been agreement. Behind them, through the glass window of Pryor's store, 8 pairs of eyes watched them walk down the street. None of them said a word. But one, the older man with the newspaper, set it down on the counter when Nathaniel was out of sight. took a long breath, said to no one in particular, "Well, I'll be," and Horace Pryor, tallying numbers in his ledger, said nothing at all, because the numbers all added up now. And Ophelia Whitcomb, standing in her good wool coat, with her expensive gloves and her silver hair, did not raise her eyes from the floor for a long time. She was thinking about what she could not have said, but something in her chest had gone loose, and something in her chest had gone tight, and both of them were the same thing. She did not buy the flowers she had come in for. She left the store. She walked home in the cold, and she thought about it all the way there. Nathaniel showed up at 8. He told himself the night before that he was only going to look. That was a lie he had needed to tell himself in order to get through the packing of Samuel into every clean layer of clothing available and the heating of the last of the formula over a coal burner that was running on its final quarter-pound of fuel. The road to the North Ridge took 40 minutes on foot. He did not have a horse. He carried Samuel in the sling Winifred had sewn, the one made from canvas and an old curtain. He walked through 6 inches of overnight snow with his boots wrapped in an extra layer of burlap tied off at the ankle, because the left sole had been separating since September, and a widowed man with a hungry infant and a boot letting in cold water is a man who has begun to understand the exact texture of desperation. He found the property without much difficulty. The cottage sat at the end of a long dirt track lined with cottonwood trees stripped bare by October. And the cottage was well. It was exactly what she had described, and not a syllable more flattering than that. The main structure was standing, which he supposed was the most optimistic thing you could say about it. The roof had a visible sag on the eastern side. 2 of the front windows were boarded from the outside. The porch railing had given up at some point and lay in pieces along the front foundation, half buried in snow. Beyond the cottage, maybe 30 yards uphill, a larger, better maintained house sat behind an iron fence. 2 stories, solid. A chimney already producing a thin thread of smoke into the grey morning sky. He was looking at the cottage, still working out the math of how bad it actually was, when the door to the larger house opened and Cordelia Blackwood came down the path. She was dressed for working weather. That was the first thing he noticed, not because he had expected otherwise exactly, but because the women he had seen her standing near at Pryor's store, the ones in their good wool coats, had given him a picture of her world that did not include practical boots and a coat with actual wear on the elbows. She carried a folder of papers under one arm. She moved through the snow with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who had been navigating difficult terrain her entire life and had stopped finding it inconvenient. "You came," she said. "I said I'd think about it." "You didn't say anything." She stopped a few feet away, looked at Samuel, bundled in the sling, watching her with the wide-eyed gravity that babies apply to unfamiliar faces. "How old?" "7 months, last week." She nodded once, looked at the baby the way you look at something fragile that is pretending it isn't. Then she shifted her attention to the cottage. "It's worse than it looks from the road." "I figured. The foundation is sound. I had a man look at it in the spring. The roof needs replacing on the east side, but 60% of it, honestly. The bones are good timber, they're not rotted through." She opened the folder, held out a hand-drawn diagram. He took it. It was detailed. Someone had taken time on it. "You drew this yourself." "I drew everything myself. There was no pride in it, just fact. Nobody else was going to." She handed him a second sheet of paper which turned out to be the terms of the arrangement: the weekly wage, the materials budget, the clause about the right to purchase the property at the end of 3 years for $1, legal deed, his name on it. He read it twice. "Why?" he asked. He looked at her. "Why would you sell it for $1? She was quiet for a moment. She looked out at the cottonwood trees. The smoke from her chimney drifted east. When she answered, she did not look at him. "Because I have more land than I can use, and more money than I need. And I have spent enough years watching both of those things do absolutely nothing for anyone." She turned back, including me. He wanted to press it. Something in him, the part that had learned not to take things at face value, the part Winifred had sometimes called his suspicious nature and he had preferred to call his reasonable caution. That part wanted to pull at the edges of the answer and see what was underneath. But Samuel chose that moment to make a decisive sound against his chest. The unmistakable pre-cry escalation that meant the discussion window was closing. "Prudence," Cordelia said. She turned toward the house. The door of the main house opened almost immediately, as if the woman inside had been waiting just inside, which Nathaniel would later discover she almost always was. Prudence Vale was somewhere in her mid-50s, broad-shouldered, silver hair pinned back practically, and the kind of face that had been weathered by decades of outdoor work into something that looked less like age and more like bedrock. She came down the path with a directness that matched Cordelia's, reached Nathaniel without introducing herself, looked at Samuel with the assessing eye of a woman who had pulled 4 children through infancy, said, "He's hungry." "Yes, ma'am." "Give me that tin. I've got it warmed already." She said it the way you state a plan, not a request. Nathaniel hesitated, only for a second, just long enough to make it clear the hesitation was intentional, that he was not a man who handed his son to strangers without a beat of deliberation. Then he unslung Samuel and placed him in Prudence Vale's arms. Prudence held the baby with the automatic competence of long practice. Samuel looked up at her face. She looked back at him. Some private negotiation occurred between them that took about 4 seconds. Then Samuel grabbed the front of her coat with one fist and apparently decided she was acceptable. "Bottles inside," Prudence said, already walking back toward the house. "Come in when you're ready. There's coffee." She was gone. Nathaniel watched the door close behind her, turned to find Cordelia Blackwood watching him with an expression that was very nearly amusement. "She's always like that," Cordelia said. "She's good with him. She's good with everyone. It's slightly annoying." He almost smiled. He caught himself. They walked the property together for the next hour. Along the way, Nathaniel met the rest of the household. Bartholomew Vale Prudence's husband foreman of the property. A broad, quiet man in his late 50s with a face that had been sun-carved into something that suggested infinite patience and no time whatsoever for foolishness. He shook Nathaniel's hand once, firm, brief, said, "Welcome to the Ridge," and went back to inspecting a broken hinge on the stable door. Fergus MacLeod, ranch hand, Irish, 60 years old, skeptical. He looked at Nathaniel over the top of a bucket he was carrying and did not smile. Another mouth. "Fergus?" Prudence called from the doorway. "I'm just observing." "You're just being rude." That too. Nathaniel had grown up in a Nevada mining town. He knew a man like Fergus MacLeod. Fergus MacLeod was not being rude. Fergus MacLeod was doing what every Irish ranch hand in 3,000 miles of frontier did with a new arrival. He was measuring. He would keep measuring for weeks. He would find fault. He would test. And if Nathaniel proved himself, Fergus would defend him against a shotgun, but only after. Nathaniel nodded at Fergus. "Nice to meet you." Fergus grunted, went back to his bucket. Then from the far side of the barn, a voice. "Is that the new one?" Josephine Cade came around the corner. 32. Tall, a work shirt tucked into canvas trousers. Hair in a practical braid that had clearly been fighting the wind and losing. She wiped her hands on a rag and looked at Nathaniel with the honest curiosity of a person who was going to form an opinion in about 90 seconds and stand by it for the rest of her life. "Nathaniel Halloran," Cordelia said. "Josephine Cade." "Nathaniel." "Ma'am." Josephine snorted. "Don't ma'am me. I'll think you're my mother, and my mother is in Kansas, and I'd like her to stay there." He almost smiled again. He was going to have to stop almost smiling. It was becoming a pattern. "You any good with horses?" Josephine asked. "I grew up around them. I'm not a specialist." "Fair. There's a black mare in the far stall who kicks. Stay clear of her for a week. She's earning back my trust." She turned, walked off toward the pasture, without waiting for a response. Nathaniel watched her go, looked at Cordelia. "They're all like that. They're all exactly like that. Come on, I'll show you the orchard." They walked to the orchard, the collapsed fencing along the lower pasture, the root cellar behind the cottage that had a good solid door and would serve well for storing what the land produced. Cordelia knew every corner of it. She pointed out drainage problems, structural advantages, the spot near the eastern fence where underground water ran close to the surface, which made that section particularly useful in dry summers. She knew the soil composition. She knew which of the orchard trees were still viable and which ones were past saving. She had clearly spent time here, not just as an owner touring her holdings, but as someone who had looked closely at the land and thought seriously about what it could become. "You've been planning this for a while," Nathaniel said. She did not answer immediately. They were standing at the edge of the orchard, looking up at the bare branches against a pale sky. "I've been thinking about it," she said finally. "Thinking and planning aren't the same thing." "What changed?" She glanced at him sideways, just briefly. "I'm not sure yet." It was not a complete answer, but it was an honest one, and honest, incomplete answers were something Nathaniel had come to prefer over tidy explanations that did not quite hold together. So, he let it go. They walked back to the cottage. She stopped at the front door. She did not move. Nathaniel noticed the pause. He noticed the way her hand hovered at the level of the door handle without touching it. He noticed the way her breath went slightly uneven and then evened itself with the practiced control of a woman who had learned decades ago how to run her own weather. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes." Then a beat. "No." She looked at him. "I have not opened this door in 19 years. He waited. She did not go on immediately. The wind moved through the cottonwood trees. Somewhere behind them, a horse whickered. "My daughter was born in this cottage," Cordelia said. "Her name was Beatrice." Nathaniel did not say anything. He had since Winifred developed a strong distaste for the things people said when they did not know what to say. He had learned that silence was often the most respectful response. So he stood on the porch of a cottage in October, and he waited. "She was born here," Cordelia said. And she died here. She was 4. A beat. That was 19 years ago this morning. Nathaniel felt something in his chest do the thing chests do when the world briefly reveals that other people are carrying weights you had not known were there. His own losses, his own shape of grief. Winifred in a bed with a candle burning down. His son, wrapped in a blanket 7 hours old and still not entirely convinced he wanted to be in a world without his mother. Mom, don't. I wasn't going to. I was just. He stopped, started again. I'm sorry. She nodded. She did not say thank you. She reached forward. She put her gloved hand on the door handle. She turned it, and she pushed the cottage door open for the first time. In 19 years, the interior was cold. It had been cold for a long time. Cold in the way that empty rooms become cold. Not just from a lack of fire, but from a lack of a person breathing in them. Dust in the corners. A table still standing. 2 chairs pushed back from it as if their occupants had stood up recently and were only briefly out of the room. Except recently in this case meant 19 years. A cradle in the far corner. Empty. The cradle was empty. Cordelia stood in the doorway, her hand still on the handle, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. She did not step inside. Nathaniel did. He walked past her carefully. He walked into a stranger's grief with the particular delicacy of a man who understood grief the way other men understand carpentry. From the inside. He looked at the room. He noted the sag in one floorboard, the blackened stone of the fireplace, the nail on the wall where perhaps a picture had once hung, and on one of the wall studs near the fireplace, a small carving, 2 sets of initials, RB and CB, 1866, and below them, on a small piece of wood tacked to the stud, a set of dates, BB, 1865 to 1869. Nathaniel looked at the carving for a long time. Then he turned around. Cordelia was still in the doorway. Come in, he said quietly. She did not move. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to look at anything. Just come in. Stand in the room for a minute. He was aware as he said it that he had no right to be telling this woman what to do in what was clearly the most private room of her life. But he was also aware that a threshold uncrossed is worse than a threshold crossed, and that she had ridden into Pryor's store yesterday morning on the anniversary of her daughter's death because she could not stand to be at home alone. And this was why. She stepped inside. She stood in the room. She looked at the empty cradle. She looked at the carving on the stud. She looked at Nathaniel. She said nothing. She did nothing dramatic. She did not weep. She did not collapse. She simply stood in a room she had not been able to stand in for 19 years. And she stayed there for perhaps 90 seconds. And then she walked back out. Nathaniel followed. Neither of them spoke as they crossed the yard back toward the main house. At the door, she stopped. She turned to him. Mr. Halloran. Ma'am. Thank you. She went inside. Nathaniel stood on the porch for a long moment. He had done exactly one thing right in the last 7 months. And it had been to put his son in Prudence Vale's arms without hesitating too visibly. And now, apparently he had done a second thing right. And he did not entirely know what the second thing was. He walked back to the cottage. He got out his tools. He started to work. 2 weeks later in the barn, at the end of a long day, Prudence Vale sat down on an overturned bucket and looked at her husband. Bartholomew had been repairing the leather straps on the sorrel's bridle by lamplight, because winter was coming, and Bartholomew was the kind of man who did the small things before the small things became big things. Barty, Prue, she's going to have to tell him. Eventually. She has to. I know. About his father. I know. Bartholomew did not look up from the strap. She has been looking for that family for 7 years, Prue. 7 years. And then he walks into Pryor's store with a baby on his chest on the 23rd of October. What are we supposed to make of that? I don't know. Coincidence? I don't believe in coincidence. Neither do I. A silence. Prudence looked at the lamp. His father saved Reginald's life, she said quietly. 1868. The Silverton shaft collapse. Reginald was pinned. Ezekiel Halloran went in through a passage a man could not fit through, except he did. And he came out with Reginald over his shoulder. And Reginald did not stop talking about that man for the rest of his life. I remember. After Reginald died, she spent every year, Barty, writing to every mining company, every union office, every Halloran in 3 territories, trying to find them, trying to say thank you, because she said, and I remember her saying it, Prudence, if a man saves my husband, I owe him a debt I cannot ever repay, and I would like at least to try. And she never found them. She never found them. Bartholomew set down the strap, and then a Halloran walks into Pryor's store with a baby on his chest, and no coat that fits, and no money, and a shopkeeper about to take the last of his dignity in front of 8 people. Bartholomew was quiet for a while. Does he know? He asked. No. Does she know? He doesn't know. Yes. When is she going to tell him? I don't know. They sat in the lamplight. The barn smelled of leather and hay and cold. Somewhere in the loft, an owl shifted. Prue. Yes. She was in the cottage that first day, wasn't she? Yeah. For the first time in 19 years. Yes. Bartholomew shook his head slowly. A lot of things are moving all at once. Yes. Do you think she can handle it? Prudence looked at her husband. She has handled everything else, Barty. For 20 years, everything alone. What I'm wondering is whether she should have to keep handling everything alone. Bartholomew picked up the strap. Might be, he said, she doesn't. The talk started in December. But before December, there was November. And before November, there was a wagon on the road. Nathaniel was working on the fence posts along the lower pasture when the wagon stopped. Expensive without being ostentatious, which was the specific kind of wealth that whispers rather than shouts. The man inside did not get out. He stopped the carriage on the road beside the property line and called out, "Halloran!" Nathaniel kept working, finished driving the post he was on. Then he straightened up. Then he turned around, but he did not walk toward the carriage. "Mr. Cormorant," he said. Cormorant leaned out the window, smiled the way powerful men smile at people they are about to be reasonable with. "I wanted to introduce myself properly. I know who you are. Good. Saves time." Cormorant looked around the property, assessed it, That was the word for what he was doing. Assessing. You've done some work up here. Some. Mrs. Blackwood keeping you busy. The question had a texture to it. Nathaniel looked at him steadily, did not answer. Cormorant adjusted the smile. I'll be direct, Halloran. I respect your time. I've had an interest in this parcel for going on 4 years. Mrs. Blackwood has declined to discuss it, which is her right. But the situation has become somewhat more complicated now that there are, let's say, personal elements involved that may be clouding the picture. What situation? The situation where you're living on her property under an arrangement that no one in this county fully understands, and half the town is talking about. The smile was gone. There are people in this territory, men of influence, men with legal resources, who take an interest in how widows manage their estates, particularly when outside parties appear and arrangements are made that might not withstand scrutiny. Nathaniel looked at him for a long moment. Are you threatening her? I'm informing you, Cormorant said, as a courtesy. A courtesy. Nathaniel walked 3 steps toward the carriage, which was close enough that Cormorant's driver shifted slightly in his seat. He kept his voice level. Then let me extend one back. Mrs. Blackwood makes her own decisions. I work for her. That's the whole of the arrangement. Whatever people are saying, whatever interest you have in this land, is a matter between you and her, not you and me. Cormorant studied him. Something moved behind the man's eyes. You seem like a reasonable man, Cormorant said. I'm a working man, which right now means I need to get back to my fence posts. Nathaniel turned around, went back to work. The carriage stayed on the road for another minute. He did not turn to watch it leave. He just kept driving posts, steady and even, one after another, until he heard the wheels finally begin to move away. That night, in a large stone house on the eastern edge of Durango, Elias Cormorant sat in his study, and a small girl of 5 ran into the room in her nightdress and climbed onto his lap without asking permission. Papa. Millie. Papa, tell me about the ranch. Which one? The one you're going to build for me. Elias Cormorant looked down at his daughter. She had his eyes and her mother's mouth. Her mother had been gone for 2 years, not dead, gone, which was in some ways harder. Millicent Cormorant did not ask about her mother anymore, but she asked about the ranch. I'm going to build you the biggest ranch in the territory, Millie. With horses, with horses, with chickens, and a room for me with a window, a room for you with a window. She leaned against his chest. Papa, when he looked out the study window, in the far distance, up on the ridge, a small light was burning. A cottage light, a window, a widow, a man who did not scare when he was told he should. Soon, Millie. Promise. I promise. He held his daughter until she fell asleep, and then he sat with her weight against him for a long time, because he had promised, and he was a man who kept his promises. And there was a ridge with a light on it that stood between him and the ranch he was going to build for his daughter, with the window and the horses and the chickens. And Elias Cormorant did not know yet how far he was willing to go, but he knew he was willing to go further than most men. He carried his daughter to bed. He tucked her in. He kissed her forehead. He whispered, soon. And in the cottage on the north ridge, Nathaniel Halloran was rocking his son to sleep. Samuel was fighting it. Samuel had been fighting sleep for 3 nights in a row. and Nathaniel was singing something under his breath. Not a lullaby. He did not know any lullabies. He was singing a song his mother had sung to him 40 years ago in a Nevada mining town, about a river that never froze, about a valley where the wind never came, about the kinds of places that do not exist and only mothers sing about. Samuel's eyes closed. Nathaniel kept singing anyway. And in the main house up the path, Cordelia Blackwood was standing in her second-floor bedroom, looking out at the cottage light and the study lamp burning in the distant house on the edge of town. She did not know Cormorant was watching her ridge, but she felt it. Something in the air had shifted. Something the way the barometric pressure had shifted in Pryor's store. She thought about the door she had opened that morning 3 weeks ago. She thought about the door she had not yet opened, the one at the top of the stairs. Beatrice's room, still closed, still waiting. She thought about a man carrying a baby through 6 inches of snow with burlap wrapped around his boot. About the way he had said, "Come in, just come in, stand in the room for a minute." As if he had known exactly what she needed, because he had needed it himself. The first snow of the season began to fall, soft and slow, the kind that means business. She did not turn out the lamp for a long time. And down in the cottage, Nathaniel Halloran laid his son in the crib, watched the small chest rise and fall, and thought about a woman who had walked into a store on the worst morning of his life and asked him if 2 tins were sufficient, or if he would prefer 3, as if the answer had actually mattered to her. He thought about the initials on the wall stud, RB&CB, 1866. He thought about a small girl who had lived in this room and died in this room. And he thought about how, for the first time in 7 months, he had gone a full day without counting the coins in his pocket. He sat down on the edge of his cot. He put his head in his hands. He did not cry. He was too tired to cry. But something in him, some tired 7-month widower part of him, said thank you, to whom he did not know. The snow fell, and outside on a ridge in Colorado in the winter of 1888, 3 lives had just begun to move toward each other. And a 4th, a man with a daughter and a promise, was watching them from a distance and waiting for his moment. The letter came on a Tuesday, and Cordelia Blackwood read it twice at the kitchen table before she said anything. Prudence was across from her, pouring coffee, waiting. 90 days, Cordelia said. 90 days for what? For him to file the formal complaint, and for me to respond. Or he presses the boundary challenge to the territorial administrator. Prudence set down the coffee pot. Cormorant. Well, he did not waste any time. No, he did not. Cordelia folded the letter, set it beside her cup. She looked out the kitchen window. The cottage light was on, which meant Nathaniel was up early, which meant he had probably been up half the night, because Samuel had been teething for 3 nights running, and Nathaniel had refused twice to let Prudence take the overnight shifts. That man, Cordelia thought, that man is going to break his own back trying to prove he does not need help. And I will let him, because I know exactly what it is to need help and refuse it, because I have been doing it for 7 years myself. And there is a certain dignity to it that a stranger cannot take from you, even when the stranger is trying to give you a kindness, especially then. She realized she had been holding the coffee cup for a long time without drinking, She drank. It was cold. Prudence. I am going to have to tell him about his father, aren't I? Yes. Soon. Yes. Cordelia set the cup down. Not yet. Prudence looked at her. Cordelia. Not yet, Prudence. He has been here 3 weeks. He is still assessing whether he can trust this. Trust me. Trust the ground under his feet. If I tell him now that the reason I walked into Pryor's store on the 23rd of October was because I have been looking for his family for 7 years to pay a debt his father is owed, he will pack up his son and he will leave. You do not know that. I know a proud man when I see one, Prue, and I have been a proud widow for 7 years. Pride does not like to discover that a kindness was actually a debt. Prudence sighed. You'll tell him. I'll tell him. When it matters. Yes, when it matters. Prudence poured her more coffee. This time hot. 90 days became 75. Nathaniel drove into town for lumber and a length of copper pipe. And the lumberyard clerk, a young man named Wesley, who had always been civil, kept his eyes on the counter and said, "Mr. Halloran, I'm afraid we can't fill this order." "Excuse me. There's a supply issue. There's a supply issue on 10 pine boards." "Yes, sir." "On 10 pine boards that were sitting in the yard when I walked in." "Yes, sir." Nathaniel looked at him. Wesley looked at the counter. "Wesley." "Sir." "Who told you?" "Sir." "Wesley." A long pause. Wesley finally looked up. His eyes were the eyes of a young man who did not want the job he was being paid to do. Mr. Pryor said, "Word came through." "Word came through." "Yes, sir." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "All right." "I'm sorry, Mr. Halloran." "You don't need to be sorry, son. You need to be somewhere else in about 6 months. This is not a good yard to work in." He walked out. He drove to Patterson's yard on the north end. Patterson filled his order. Patterson did not ask questions. Patterson had a face like a slab of granite and hands that had built half the barns in the county. Nathaniel loaded his lumber. He drove back to the ridge. 75 became 60. The letter from Thomas Reed at the bank came in the 2nd week, and Cordelia read that one at the same kitchen table. And she did not read it twice. She read it once, folded it, placed it under the coffee cup. "Well," she said. Prudence looked at her. "How bad?" "He is recommending a review of the lending arrangements." Which means they are considering making my operating credit more expensive, or eliminating it, as a mechanism of social pressure, to let me know I am being watched. On whose behalf? On behalf of whichever director has been leaned on, which in this case is Ophelia Whitcomb's husband. Prudence went still. Ophelia Whitcomb. Yes. The woman who was in Pryor's store that morning. Yes. The one who looked at the floor. Yes, that one. Prudence was quiet for a long moment. Cordelia. Yes. That woman is going to come here. I know. She's going to want to say something to you. I know. What are you going to say when she does? Cordelia looked out the window. The cottage light, the thin thread of smoke from the small chimney. I don't know, she said. 60 became 45. The knock at the main house came on a Sunday afternoon. Cordelia was in the study, going over the accounts. Prudence answered the door. Prudence did not come back to the study for a full minute, which was unusual. Then Prudence appeared in the doorway, very carefully, expressionless. "Ophelia Whitcomb," Prudence said. "Here." "Yes, at the front door." "Yes." Cordelia closed the ledger. She realized they'd been rehearsing this conversation in her head for 2 weeks. She had prepared several different sentences. She had prepared cold sentences, and warm sentences, and cutting sentences, and forgiving sentences. And in the moment when Ophelia Whitcomb was standing in her hallway with snow on the shoulders of her expensive coat, Cordelia found that she did not want to use any of the sentences she had prepared. She wanted to hear what Ophelia had come to say. "Show her into the parlor. Would you bring us tea?" "I will." Ophelia Whitcomb sat on the parlor sofa with the peculiar rigidity of a woman who had chosen this errand and was now regretting it. Her hands were in her lap. Her gloves were still on, which was a small betrayal, because a woman in her own social class did not sit in another woman's parlor with her gloves on unless she was afraid. Cordelia sat across from her. Prudence brought the tea, set it down, left, closed the door behind her. But Cordelia knew Prudence had not gone far. Prudence would be in the hallway, not eavesdropping, just present, just there in case. Mrs. Blackwood, Mrs. Whitcomb. Ophelia took a breath. She had been silver-haired for as long as Cordelia had known her, which was 15 years. But today she looked older, as if something had visited her in the night and set up permanent residence. "I have come to apologize." Cordelia did not respond. "I was in Mr. Pryor's store that morning, the morning of the 23rd. I saw everything, and I looked at the floor. I looked at the floor because looking at anything else would have required me to do something, and I did not want to do anything. I wanted to buy my flour. I wanted to go home. I wanted to have my Sunday, undisturbed." She stopped. "I do not know why I am telling you this in these terms. I have prepared a much nicer version. Please don't use it." Ophelia looked up. "I beg your pardon. Please don't use the nicer version. Please just say what you actually mean." There was a long pause. Ophelia removed her gloves. She set them carefully in her lap. Her hands without the gloves were the hands of a 60-year-old woman who had never done a day of physical labor, which was not a criticism. It was just a fact. "I have looked away my whole life," Ophelia said. Cordelia waited. "When my husband's brother beat his wife, when our stable hand's little girl came to the kitchen door with a bruise on her face, and I gave her a biscuit and sent her home. When the mail carrier had a stroke on our porch last February, and I called the doctor and then went inside and closed the door and let the doctor find him. I have. My whole life. I have looked at the floor, when looking anywhere else would have required something of me." She was not crying. She was not performing. She was just talking. "And on the 23rd of October, in Mr. Pryor's store, I looked at the floor again, and you did not." Cordelia was quiet. Ophelia looked at her hand. "I do not know what you are, Mrs. Blackwood. I do not entirely understand what you did that morning, or why. But I have thought about it every day since, and I would very much like, if it is possible, not to be the kind of woman I have been for the rest of the time I have left." The clock in the hall ticked. Cordelia looked at Ophelia Whitcomb, 60 years old, in a good wool coat, silver hair, expensive gloves in her lap. A face that had gone soft around the edges the way faces do when they have spent a long time avoiding hard truths and have finally decided to stop, Cordelia thought. She thought about forgiveness. She thought about how forgiveness is expensive, and how the person doing the forgiving usually pays more than the person being forgiven. She thought about her own life, about 7 years of managing an estate alone, about 19 years of not opening a door. She did not think she was in a position to forgive anyone anything, but she was in a position to give someone a job. Ophelia, yes, I am going to build a school for the children of the railroad workers. There are 43 of them who have had no education past the age of 8. Their mothers cannot work because there is nowhere safe to leave the babies. I have been planning it for 2 years and doing nothing about it. I am going to do something about it now. A school, yes, and I need a committee. Women who can raise money, women who can talk to the other wives in this town whose husbands sit on boards. I need someone who understands the room. I understand the ledger. I do not understand the room. Ophelia stared at her. You are asking me to. I am asking you to help me build a school, yes. After. Yes. I do not understand you, Mrs. Blackwood. I don't need you to understand me. I need you to help me. Ophelia sat very still. Then she began very slowly to smile. Not a happy smile, a different kind. The kind that happens when a person has been carrying something for a long time and has just been asked unexpectedly to set it down. When do we start? Now. Ophelia laughed. It was a surprise sound. It came out of her before she had permission to make it. All right, Mrs. Blackwood. All right. Now. Prudence appeared in the doorway with a fresh pot of tea. Prudence had in fact been eavesdropping, but she did not admit it. She just poured more tea, and she looked at Cordelia across the room, and Cordelia read the look, and the look said, well done. 45 became 30. The Merchants' Winter Assembly was held on the second Tuesday of December in the main hall above the bank on Reyes Street. Cordelia attended as she had for 2 decades. She wore her best coat. She let Prudence pin her hair. She rode into town beside Bartholomew in the wagon. She did not tell Nathaniel where she was going. He was in the middle of hanging a new door on the cottage. He waved at her as she rode past. She waved back. She had not told him what she was about to do, because she had known since November that if she told him, he would talk her out of it. Because he would say, it is my fight. Because he would say, you don't have to. Because he would say, do not turn my situation into your situation. Do not turn a private arrangement into a public one. Do not make yourself a target in front of the whole territory over me. And she would have listened, and she would have made a different decision, and it would have been the wrong decision, which was why she had not told him. She stood at the front of the room after the formal proceedings. She waited for the applause for the mayor's tedious speech to die down. She raised her hand. The room quieted. Ladies and gentlemen, every face turned. I have 3 announcements to make. She named them. 1. She had filed with the county clerk a formal 3-year lease and purchase agreement with Nathaniel Halloran for the Northridge cottage and its surrounding acreage. The terms were public record. Anyone who wished to see the terms could visit the clerk's office. There would be no ambiguity. There would be no arrangement in the sense that the word had been used around town in whispers for the past 2 months. There was a lease. There was a purchase option. There was work being done, and it would be finished. 2. She was committing capital to the construction of the Durango Railroad Workers' School. Site selected. Plans drawn. Construction to begin in the spring. Free tuition. Free nursery. 53 children eligible in year 1. 3. She had appointed a committee to run the school's fundraising, chaired by Mrs. Ophelia Whitcomb. The room went still. Ophelia stood up from her seat. Ophelia stood up, and in her expensive coat and her silver hair and her calm 60-year-old voice, she said, "I would like to open the committee's fund with a personal donation of $500. Somebody near the door drew in a breath. $500 was serious money in the territory in 1888. Harrison Webb, who ran the largest dry goods operation in 3 counties, stood up next. He was not smiling. Cordelia. Harrison, you cannot just make these decisions unilaterally. The implications for how the community perceives. I have made decisions unilaterally for 20 years, Harrison. You have never found it objectionable before. This is different. How? He did not answer immediately, which told her everything. That the honest answer was something Harrison Webb did not want to say out loud in company. Which was, this is different because a widow of your station making an arrangement with a widower of his station suggests intimacies that make the town uncomfortable. Which was, this is different because you have made yourself the subject of gossip, and the town would prefer that its wealthiest widow remain the subject of respect. Which was, this is different because Elias Cormorant has been talking, and Elias Cormorant has friends. She did not need him to say it. She knew what he meant. Harrison, I appreciate your concern. I do not require your approval. Somebody near the back of the room laughed. It was a young voice. It was quickly muffled. Harrison Webb sat down. The rest of the room began to shift, slowly away from him, toward Ophelia Whitcomb, toward Cordelia. The way a herd shifts when it has just identified where the wind is coming from. Cordelia stepped down from the platform. She walked to the back of the room. She found her coat. She put it on. At the door, someone caught her sleeve. Rosalind Merriweather, 43 years old, schoolteacher at the small church basement school where 38 children were currently being taught by candlelight. Cordelia had known her for 6 years. They had exchanged perhaps 20 sentences in that time. Mrs. Blackwood, Mrs. Merriweather, I would like to volunteer to teach at the school. I am not the one you should tell. I know I am telling you anyway. Cordelia looked at her. She had never really looked at Rosalind Merriweather. She had seen her at church. She had seen her at civic events. But she had never really looked. Rosalind had brown eyes, and there was something in the brown eyes that Cordelia recognized. Something Cordelia had spent 19 years learning to recognize in other women without ever asking about it. She had lost a child. Cordelia did not know it as a fact, but she knew it as a fact. Rosalind, yeah, come to the Ridge on Sunday. There is tea, and I would like to speak with you. I will come. The wagon ride home was cold. Bartholomew did not speak. Bartholomew never spoke on wagon rides. It was one of the things Cordelia liked most about him. Nathaniel was waiting on the porch of the main house when she got back. He had a lamp with him. Samuel was in his arm. The baby was asleep. Cordelia climbed down from the wagon. She walked toward him. She stopped at the foot of the porch. He looked at her. You could have told me. I know. Cordelia. I could have. I know. Why didn't you? Because I did not want to give you the chance to talk me out of it. He stared at her. Then he said, that is not an acceptable reason. I know. But, you are probably right that I would have tried. Yes. He shifted Samuel to his other arm. Come inside, she said. It is too cold to have this conversation out here. He came inside. Prudence took Samuel to the nursery. Cordelia poured coffee. They sat at the kitchen table, and she told him about Cormoran's legal filing, about the 90 days, about Reed at the bank, about the school, about Ophelia Whitcomb, about all of it, all at once. Everything she had been holding for the past 6 weeks. He listened. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he said, You have been holding all of this alone. Yes. For how long? Since November. Cordelia. Nathaniel, I have been holding things alone for a long time. It is not new. It is not remarkable. It is what widows do. It is what proud widows do. She almost smiled. You are not in a position to talk to me about pride, Mr. Halloran. No, I suppose I am not. They drank their coffee. Then he said, Tell me about Beatrice. She looked at him. Why? Because I want to know. The wind moved outside. The house held around them. She told him. She did not tell him all of it. There was not enough time in the world to tell all of it. But she told him about a small girl with dark curls who had liked to climb into bed between her and Reginald in the mornings, who had had a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Wolf for reasons no adult ever fully understood, who had learned to say her father's name before she had learned to say her mother's, which had been a source of good-natured competition between the parents, who had gotten sick on a Sunday, who had been feverish by Monday, who had died on Tuesday morning as the sun came up, who was buried on the ridge behind the cottage, under a headstone Cordelia had not visited in 11 years. I could not bear it, she said. The visits made it worse. So I stopped, and then I could not bear the not visiting. So I stopped thinking about it, and then I could not bear the not thinking. So I stopped thinking about anything for a while. And then Reginald died, and I ran an estate for 7 years, and I did not visit her grave, and I did not open the cottage, and I told myself I was managing. She stopped, started again. I was not managing. Nathaniel looked at his hand. Winifred was killed in the Dalton mine collapse. She looked up. You said she died in a hospital. She did. She was in the collapse. She was working the sorting shift. The company had women on the sorting shift. She was pregnant. 7 months. The ventilation shaft had been blocked. The company had been notified of the blockage 6 weeks before. Nothing was done. There was a fire. There was smoke. And she survived long enough to get to the hospital, and long enough to deliver Samuel, and then she did not survive any longer. The kitchen was very quiet. I sued the company, Nathaniel said. And I lost. Because the company was protected by a silent investor whose lawyers made the case last 2 years, and who filed enough procedural motions that I ran out of money and had to withdraw. And Samuel was 6 weeks old, and I had 4 cents in my pocket, and I could not fight anymore. She reached across the table. She put her hand on his. It was the first time she had touched him. Nathaniel. Yes. The silent investor. Yeah. Do you know who it was? I never knew. She was quiet for a long time. Nathaniel. Yeah. It was Cormorant. He did not move. He did not move for a very long time. Then very slowly he took his hand out from under hers. He stood up, he walked to the window. He looked out at the cottage, at the small light in the small structure where his son was sleeping. How long have you known? I found out today. Ezekiel Thorne in Denver was tracing Cormorant's investments as part of the counter to the boundary challenge. It came up in the paperwork. Today. Today. And I am telling you tonight, because I said I would. He stood at the window. She waited. Cordelia. Yeah. I am not a man who has ever wanted to hurt another man. I know. But, yeah. I want to hurt this man. I know. He turned around. What do we do? She stood up from the table. She walked to the window. She stood beside him. She looked out at the cottage light, at the small chimney's thread of smoke. We do what we have been doing, she said. We build the school, we finish the cottage, we fix the fence, and we let Ezekiel Thorne do his work in Denver. And when the time comes to stand in a courtroom and look at Elias Cormorant across a table, we will look at him. That is not enough. I know it is not enough. It is what we are going to do. He looked at her. She looked at him. 30 became 15. The blizzard came on a Saturday. Cordelia felt it before she saw it. That was the phrase Bartholomew used later when he told the story. That was how his wife told it. She felt it before she saw it. At 5 in the morning she was awake. At 6 in the morning she was dressed. By 7 the sky to the north was the color of an old iron pan. Nathaniel came up from the cottage at 7:30 with Samuel. He had felt it too. That is a bad one, he said. I know. Where do you want us? The root cellar has fresh supplies, but the main house is warmer. Prudence, get the boy inside. Nathaniel and I will get the animals in. They worked for the next 4 hours. Nathaniel took the stable. Cordelia and Bartholomew and Fergus took the outbuildings. Josephine took the pasture and brought in the sheep. Prudence took Samuel and the cat and the coffee and made bread. Because Prudence made bread when things were bad. Because bread was Prudence's answer to weather. By 11 the storm had hit. Visibility went to 20 yards, then 10, then 5. They came into the kitchen. Wet, cold. Nathaniel's beard had ice in it. Josephine's braid had come undone. Fergus had a cut on his hand from a nail. Bartholomew looked at his wife and said, "The stable roof will hold. The east side of the cottage might not." Cordelia was at the window. She said, "Nathaniel." "Yeah." "The cottage." He came to the window. They looked. The cottage was not visible, which could mean nothing. It could just be the whiteout, or it could mean... A sound came through the wind, not a crack, more like a long exhalation, the sound of something giving way under sustained pressure. Nathaniel was already moving. "Nathaniel." "The east wall." "Nathaniel." "Samuel's crib is in the west room. He is up here anyway. But my tools, my records, everything I have." "Nathaniel." He stopped at the door. "I am coming with you," she said. "No." "Yes." Cordelia. "Nathaniel Halloran. I am 46 years old. I have run a cattle operation through 3 droughts and a market crash. I know how to walk a rope line in a blizzard. Get your coat." He got his coat. They went out. The guide rope from the main house to the cottage had been strung in December for exactly this situation. Nathaniel had run it himself, 20 yards. It had never seemed like a great distance until that moment. Hand over hand, he led. She followed. Her free hand locked around his coat. The wind was a wall. The snow was horizontal. The air had no warmth, the air had no give. The air had opinions, and the opinions were violent. The cottage came into view as a shape first, then a wrongness in the shape. The east side was not the section he had rebuilt. He had done that right. It was the connecting section between old and new. The joint that had always been the weak point. And the weight of 4 feet of wet snow in 6 hours had found it. And the roof had pancaked inward. And the wall below it had buckled. They pushed through the door. The main room was accessible. Half of it. He took inventory in 3 seconds. Nothing structural at imminent risk on the west side. Stove intact. Crib intact. And in the floor beside the crib, the root cellar hatch, which he pulled open, which was when he heard the sound. Not Samuel. Samuel was safe in the main house on Prudence's hip. He knew that. But there was a sound. Thin, high, rhythmic. Cordelia was already listening. "There is something alive under there," Nathaniel said. "The cat." "Which cat?" "Prudence's cat." "Prudence's cat is up at the main house." Prudence has 2 cats. One of them is a barn cat, and she must have come down here for shelter. The grey tabby was under a roof beam and 2 fallen wall boards, alive, with a broken rear leg and a level of vocal outrage that under other circumstances would have been impressive. It took 40 minutes. The beams were heavy. The space was wrong. Nathaniel's fingers were going numb. And it was Cordelia. Cordelia in her practical coat. Cordelia with her 50-year-old hands that had never done heavy labor. Cordelia who finally got her hands under the cat at the right angle to lift her clear, while Nathaniel held the beam with the last of what his arms had. They came back into the main house, hand over hand on the guide rope, Cordelia carrying the cat inside her coat. Prudence looked at them, then at the cat, closed her eyes briefly. "Foolish animal," she said to the cat, in a tone that was not actually addressing the cat. Nathaniel sat down on the kitchen bench. He could not immediately get up again. His back had locked. His hands were bad. He had been running on the fuel that emergencies provide. And the fuel was gone. Cordelia sat beside him. She did not say anything. She just sat there, close, the warmth of her immediate and real, after the white cold outside. Samuel abandoned the spoon and pot on the kitchen floor, crawled across to Nathaniel, pulled himself upright against Nathaniel's knee, looked up at him with the grave, focused expression he had been developing lately, the one that suggested he was taking a careful census of his available people. Nathaniel put his damaged hand on top of Samuel's head. "Hey." Samuel said something in his own language, something that had the cadence of an assessment. "Yeah," Nathaniel said. "We're okay." From inside Cordelia's coat, the cat made a sound of continuing complaint. Prudence said, "I'll need to splint that leg." "Can you?" Nathaniel asked. "I've splinted worse." The storm reached its peak in the late afternoon and maintained that peak for 6 hours. And the 5 of them and the cat stayed in the main house kitchen. They ate. Prudence produced a meal from what was on hand, which was considerable, because she was the kind of person who kept things on hand. Samuel ate, fell asleep in Nathaniel's arms, was put to bed in the small room of the kitchen. That had been, Cordelia said, without elaborating, Beatrice's room, which was the first time Nathaniel had heard the room referred to since their porch conversation about the initials on the wall stud. Somewhere past 10, with the wind still running hard outside, Cordelia said, very quietly, "The cottage can be repaired." "I know. The east wall is the issue. If the foundation held, it will have held. Then it is a rebuild on the east side and a full roof replacement. 6 weeks in good weather." She looked at him across the table. The lamp between them was burning low again, the same way it always seemed to be burning low when they were saying the things that mattered. "You do not have to live in it while you are rebuilding it." He looked at her. "There are rooms here." He was quiet. "That is a different arrangement than what we agreed to. It is a practical response to a collapsed roof, which is also a different situation than what we agreed to." He considered it. "Prudence will talk." Prudence has been talking since December. She has just been doing it internally, which for Prudence is an extraordinary exercise of restraint. From the direction of the bedroom hallway, with uncanny timing, Prudence's voice came. "I can hear you." Cordelia looked at the hallway, then back at Nathaniel. Something crossed her face, not the fraction of a smile, not the ghost of a smile, an actual smile, brief, unguarded, the first he had ever seen at full measure. "Stay," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "Okay." Outside the blizzard, pressed against the walls of the main house with everything it had, and the house held. 15 became 7, then 3. Rosalind Merriweather came to the ridge on the Sunday after the blizzard. She brought lemon cake, which was the only thing she said she knew how to bake. She and Cordelia sat in the parlor and drank tea, and Rosalind said very quietly, "His name was Thomas. He was 2 years old. It was 15 years ago. Croup, in the middle of one bad night." Cordelia said, "Beatrice, 4 years old, 19 years ago, fever, on the 23rd of October." They looked at each other. They did not need to say anything else. They drank tea. 3 became 1. The subpoena was delivered on a Monday morning. Cordelia was in the kitchen. Samuel was on the floor, pulling himself up against her leg, which he did now, constantly, as if he had recently discovered that vertical was a possibility and he was going to explore it. He pulled up. He balanced. He looked at her, and with the concentrated focus that 11-month-olds sometimes achieve, he said his first word. "Ma." Cordelia went still. Nathaniel was at the counter. He had come in for coffee. He had heard. Neither of them said anything. Samuel wobbled, sat down, looked pleased with himself. He said it again. "Ma." He looked directly at Cordelia when he said it. Cordelia did not move. She did not correct him. She did not look at Nathaniel, because she did not trust her own face. Nathaniel did not move either. Prudence, coming in with the mail, saw both of their faces, saw Samuel on the floor, made the connection in half a second, set the mail down on the table without comment, took Samuel up in her arms, kissed the top of his head, walked out of the kitchen. The subpoena was on top of the mail. Cordelia picked it up. She read it. She said, 30 days. Nathaniel picked it up. He read it. He said, for what? For the county administrator's hearing. Cormorant has moved to formally void the lease on grounds of improper management of the estate. He has filed a supporting document which claims Reginald signed over the North Ridge parcel to him 6 months before Reginald died. Nathaniel stared at her. Did he? No. Then the document. The document is a forgery. Can we prove it? She looked at him. We are about to find out. Outside the kitchen window, the March wind moved through the cottonwoods, and 30 days began to count down. Ezekiel Thorne arrived from Denver on a Wednesday. 30 days had become 27. He was a small man, 62, round spectacles, a brown suit that had been made 20 years earlier and cared for so meticulously that it looked, if not new, then at least unbeaten. He carried a black leather case and an expression of professional gravity that had been perfected in courtrooms for 40 years. He shook Cordelia's hand at the door. Mrs. Blackwood. Ezekiel, I have read the filing. It is nonsense. Yes, elegant nonsense, but nonsense. Can we prove it? That is what I am here to determine. He set his case on the parlor table. He opened it. He took out his papers. He looked around the room. His eyes stopped on Nathaniel, who was standing in the doorway with Samuel on his hip. You must be Halloran. Yes. Sit down, Mr. Halloran. I would like to speak with both of you, and the boy is welcome. He will not testify. Nathaniel almost smiled. He caught himself. He sat. Ezekiel Thorne worked for 3 days. He worked in the parlor. He worked in the study. He worked at the kitchen table late into the evenings, while Prudence kept the coffee coming and Bartholomew brought in wood for the fire. He asked questions. He asked, when was the last time Reginald had made a formal transfer of any parcel? He asked who had witnessed the signing of the alleged document. He asked where was Reginald in March of 1881. He asked who was Cormorant's clerk that year. He asked, and Cordelia answered, and Prudence answered, and Bartholomew answered, and each answer became a small piece of the shape of the case they would build. On the third evening, Ezekiel Thorne set down his pen. There is a letter, he said, a letter. Reginald wrote correspondence in the last month of his life. The estate records show he wrote 14 letters in March 1881. 12 have been accounted for. 2 have not. If the 2 remaining letters exist, and if one of them addresses Cormorant's fraud, then we do not have a case. We have an ending. Cordelia looked at Prudence. Prudence had been standing in the kitchen doorway with a coffee pot in her hand. The coffee pot began to shake very slightly. Prudence. Yes. Do you know where the letters are? Prudence did not answer immediately. She set the coffee pot down on the sideboard. She wiped her hands on her apron. She looked at her employer of 31 years. She looked at the small lawyer from Denver. She looked at the man with a baby on his hip who had walked into her kitchen 4 months ago as a stranger and had, in the way of these things, stopped being one. I have one of them, Prudence said. Cordelia went still. Prudence. I have had it for 7 years. He gave it to me 2 days before he died. He said, keep this, and when you know who it belongs to, give it to them. And I said, Mr. Blackwood, who is it for? And he said, I do not know yet, Prudence, but you will. Prudence's voice was very steady. I have carried that letter in a box in my kitchen for 7 years. Cordelia. because I did not know who it belonged to until this month, and I have been waiting for the right moment to bring it out, and I think the right moment is now. She went into the kitchen. She came back with a small wooden box. She set it on the parlor table beside Ezekiel Thorne's papers. Cordelia did not open the box. Nathaniel did not either. Ezekiel Thorne, with the specific delicacy of a man who had opened many boxes in his life, opened this one. He lifted out a folded letter, sealed, Reginald's seal, untouched for 7 years. May I? Please. He broke the seal. He read. He read for what felt like a long time. It was probably 90 seconds. He read it twice. When he set it down, his hands were not quite steady. Mrs. Blackwood. Yes. This letter is dated the 12th of March, 1881. Your husband died on the 22nd. Yes. He writes that on the 7th of March, Elias Cormorant approached him with a document to sign. Reginald signed it. He signed it under the impression that he was signing a lease agreement for a pasture in the southern grazing lands. He now believed, that the document he signed was a different document. He has retained the impression of the seal on his blotter. He has recorded the date. He has recorded the witnesses Cormorant used. He has recorded Cormorant's signature style, and specifically the way the E in Elias descends in an unusual fashion in this instance. Ezekiel Thorne looked up. This letter is the exact proof of forgery we require. Cordelia was not moving. There is more, Ezekiel said. More. Yes, Mrs. Blackwood. Would you like to read it yourself before I continue? No. Read it. Ezekiel took a breath. He writes, and I quote, Prudence. If you are reading this, it is because I did not have time to fix what I set in motion. I need you to find the Halloran family. Ezekiel Halloran saved my life in the Silverton shaft collapse of 1868. I have never repaid that debt. I have tried. I have written every year. I have failed to find them. But if the day comes when they find us, Prudence, or when we find them, I need Cordelia to know that Ezekiel saved my life, and I intended, if I could ever locate his son, to make that son my heir. His son is my son now. He does not know it, but he is. Please tell Cordelia. Ezekiel Thorne set the letter down. The parlor was very quiet. Nathaniel was staring at Cordelia. Cordelia was staring at the letter. Nathaniel said, Cordelia. She did not answer. Cordelia. She looked up. You knew. Yes. You knew before you came into Pryor's store. Yes. That day, on the 23rd of October, you did not walk in for tea. I did walk in for tea, but I did not stay for tea, because I saw a man with a baby in a sling, and I saw the name on the credit ledger when Pryor pulled it out, and I saw the name Halloran, and I put together what I had spent 7 years looking for in 8 seconds at the back of a general store. Nathaniel's face was very pale. You have known for 4 months that I was. That your father saved my husband's life. Yes, I have known for 4 months. And you did not. I did not. Because I was going to. When it mattered. When it would not simply push you back onto the road with nothing. When you were rooted enough that I could tell you without you feeling that you had been taken in on false terms. Cordelia, I know. Cordelia, I know. He stood up. He shifted Samuel to his other arm. He walked out. He did not slam the door. He walked out with the exact careful control of a man who did not trust himself to slam a door. And he closed the parlor door behind him, softly. And then he closed the front door of the main house, softly. And then Cordelia heard him crossing the porch, and then heard nothing. Ezekiel Thorne, who had been present at many family disclosures over 40 years, said nothing. Prudence in the doorway said nothing. Cordelia looked at Prudence. Prudence said very quietly, "Give him some hours, Cordelia." "How many?" "As many as he needs." He came back at sunset. Cordelia had been on the porch for 2 hours. She had not been able to work. She had not been able to read. She had not been able to eat. She had done exactly one useful thing in the 4 hours since Nathaniel had walked out, which was to sit on the porch and wait. She saw him from a long way off. He was walking, with Samuel in the sling, along the ridge line, the last light of the day catching the shape of him. He came up the path. He came up the porch steps. He stood in front of her. He was very tired. Samuel in the sling was asleep. Cordelia did not stand up. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. "I walked to the edge of the north field. Yes. I sat there for 2 hours. Yes. Samuel slept. I thought I did a lot of thinking. Yes. Cordelia. Yeah. I understand why you did not tell me." She waited. "I do not agree with it. I want to say that clearly. I do not agree with the decision to keep it from me for 4 months, because it took a choice out of my hands. And that is a thing I have not been willing to have done to me by anyone for a very long time. I know. But I understand it. And I have decided, sitting on the north field with my son, that I am not going to walk away from this. Not because of that. Not because of a letter. Not because of a debt I did not know about that my father paid 20 years before I was old enough to understand what he did. I am not going to walk away because I do not want to walk away." He shifted Samuel in the sling. "We finish this together." Cordelia stood up. She did not know what she was going to do until she did it, which was to walk 2 steps forward and take his free hand in both of hers and press it against her cheek briefly and then let it go. "Thank you." "Cordelia." "Yes. Do not do that again." "I will not. Ever. I will not." He nodded. He went inside, to put Samuel down, to eat something, to sleep. Cordelia stayed on the porch for a while longer, and she watched the last of the light bleed out of the ridge line. And she thought about the man who had walked for 2 hours with his son and come back and said, "We finish this together." And she thought about the 27 years of her marriage. And she thought about how Reginald had loved her. He had loved her the way steady men love. He had loved her with the reliability of the seasons. But he had never once in 27 years held her hand against his cheek. And she thought, well, that is something. 27 days became 15. Then 7. Rosalind Merriweather came to the ridge every Sunday now. She brought Ophelia Whitcomb with her the 2nd week. Ophelia had made an apple cake. Ophelia's apple cake was better than her lemon cake had been, which she conceded with a small smile was itself an improvement. The 3 women, Cordelia, Rosalind, Ophelia. They sat in the parlor. They drank tea. They talked about the school. They talked about the 53 children. They talked about paint colors for the classroom, and about which of the local suppliers could be trusted for slate boards, and about how they were going to explain to Harrison Webb that his wife was joining the committee. They did not talk about the trial that was coming, except in fragments, except at the edges, except in the way three women who have decided to be friends will circle a thing that is heavy without touching it directly. On the last Sunday before the hearing, Rosalind put down her tea and said, "Cordelia, yes, you are going to be all right, whatever happens on Friday." "How do you know?" "Because you have three of us now, and you did not before." Ophelia said, "4." Rosalind said, "4." Cordelia said, "Who is the fourth?" Ophelia looked at Rosalind. Rosalind looked at Ophelia. Ophelia said, "You mean besides your Mr. Halloran?" Cordelia set her tea down. "He is not." "He is." "He is not." "Cordelia, he is." Rosalind was laughing, silently, into her tea. Cordelia looked at both of them. "I am 46 years old." "Yeah, I have not." "We know." "I am not sure I know how to." Rosalind said, "You do not need to know how, Cordelia. You just need to not stop him from finding out." Cordelia looked at her tea. She did not have a response to that. She drank her tea instead. 7 became 3. Elias Cormorant sat in his study on the Wednesday night before the Friday hearing. He was going over his testimony. He was reviewing the exhibits his lawyer had prepared. He was in the way of men who have prepared thoroughly, going over each piece one final time. His daughter Millicent came in. She was in her night dress. She was 5 years old. She was carrying a small stuffed bear that she called Mr. Copper for reasons that were entirely her own. "Papa." "Millie, it is very late." "I know." "You should be in bed." "I know." She climbed onto his lap without asking. She did that. It was in his life the single greatest privilege he had ever been granted. "Papa." "Yes." Miss Alcorn said something today. Miss Alcorn was Millicent's tutor. Miss Alcorn was, in Cormorant's opinion, a woman of dubious tact who overshared her opinions with her 5-year-old charge. He was going to speak to Miss Alcorn about this. What did Miss Alcorn say? Miss Alcorn said, "Papa." Miss Alcorn said that on Friday there is a big meeting about land, and that you are trying to take a lady's land. "Millie." "Papa." "Yes." "Is that what you are doing?" Elias Cormorant looked down at his daughter. She had his eyes, and her mother's mouth. Her mother had left him for reasons Cormorant had spent 2 years telling himself he did not understand. But which, in the small hours of certain nights, he understood perfectly. He had thought about explaining it to Millicent. He had thought about telling her that the land in question had been his brother-in-law's land, that the land in question had been promised to him in his own understanding before his brother-in-law had died, that the land in question was land he intended to build a great ranch on for her, a ranch with horses and chickens and a room for her with a window, and that the widow currently in possession of the land had brought this on herself by refusing to negotiate reasonably. He had rehearsed this speech in his mind for 2 years. It was a good speech. It had internal consistency. He tried to tell it now, to his daughter, on his lap, in her nightdress, holding Mr. Copper. He opened his mouth. He could not do it, because Millicent was 5 years old, and the speech required an audience that had already agreed to the premise. And Millicent at 5 had not yet learned to agree to premises. She had only learned to ask, "Is that what you are doing?" Elias Cormorant closed his mouth. He looked at his daughter for a long time. "Millie." "Yes, Papa." "Yes, that is what I am doing." Millicent nodded slowly. "Papa." "Yes." "Is she a nice lady?" He was quiet for a long time. "I do not know, Millie." "Have you asked her?" "No." "Well," Millicent said, "how do you know if you are supposed to take her land if you have not asked her if she is nice?" She kissed his cheek. She climbed off his lap. She took Mr. Copper. She went to bed. Elias Cormorant sat in his study for a long time after she left. He did not review any more exhibits. He looked at the fire. He did not that night come to any conclusion, but something in his chest that had been very tight for 2 years went slightly loose. He noted it. He did not act on it yet, but he noted it. 3 became 1. The hearing was held in the county administrator's chambers above the sheriff's office, which was not a room built for large audiences, but which on the morning of the Friday in question was packed with every merchant, banker, ranch hand, seamstress, teacher, and idle citizen who could physically fit through the door. Cordelia sat at a table on one side of the room, Ezekiel Thorne beside her, Nathaniel behind them. Elias Cormorant sat at the other table, his own lawyer beside him, a tall man from Denver named Wexley, who had a reputation for winning cases he should have lost. Ophelia Whitcomb sat in the front row, Rosalind Merriweather beside her. Prudence Vale sat in the second row, wooden box in her lap. The whole town, as Cordelia had noted quietly to Ezekiel Thorne on the walk-in, appeared to be present. "Yes," Ezekiel had said, "that is what happens when a small city becomes convinced that a widow has been wronged by a rich man. This is going to be interesting." The administrator was a slow, thoughtful man named Judge Halperton. He listened to Wexley open the case. He listened to the introduction of the alleged document. He listened to Wexley's arguments about the estate management. He listened to Wexley's suggestion that Cordelia Blackwood's judgment had been compromised by her arrangement with Mr. Halloran, which was, Wexley said, a matter the community could not ignore. Nathaniel did not react. Cordelia did not react. Ezekiel Thorne wrote in a notebook. Then it was Ezekiel's turn. He stood up. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He walked to the front of the room. He addressed the administrator. He said, "Your Honor, my learned colleague has made a great many claims. I will address one of them." He held up the document. This document, which the plaintiff claims was signed by Reginald Blackwood on the 7th of March 1881, cedes the North Ridge parcel to Elias Cormorant. It bears Reginald Blackwood's signature, which appears authentic. Wexley smiled. Ezekiel Thorne continued, "However, I have obtained a letter dated the 12th of March 1881 in Reginald Blackwood's own hand, held for the past 7 years by Reginald Blackwood's household manager, in which Mr. Blackwood documents that he was tricked into signing this exact document, that he believed at the time of signing that he was signing a lease for pasture land, and that he identified in the letter specific features of the fraud." The room shifted. "I have 3 additional witnesses to the signing who will testify that on the 7th of March 1881, Reginald Blackwood was told by Elias Cormorant that the document was a pasture lease. Two of these witnesses have been paid by Elias Cormorant to remain silent for 7 years. They are prepared to reverse their testimony today in exchange for immunity, which I have arranged with the county prosecutor's office. Wexley stopped smiling. Judge Halperton leaned forward. Mr. Thorne, would you produce the letter? Ezekiel produced the letter. He handed it to the bailiff. The bailiff handed it to the judge. The judge read. He read for a long time. He set the letter down. He said, Mrs. Vale. Prudence stood up. Yes, Your Honor. Would you come forward, please? Prudence walked forward, wooden box in hand. She placed it on the front table. She opened it. She lifted out the second envelope, the one Ezekiel had not read yet. I kept his letter, Prudence said. Her voice did not shake. I kept it for 7 years, because he told me to, because he said, when you know who it belongs to, give it to them. And I did not know until 3 weeks ago, and now I do. She turned to Nathaniel. Mr. Halloran. Nathaniel stood up. This letter is for you. Mr. Blackwood wrote it to your father. He never mailed it, because he never found him. But he wrote it, and it is yours. She held out the envelope. Nathaniel walked forward. He took the envelope. He looked at Prudence. He said quietly, Thank you, Mrs. Vale. Prudence went back to her seat. The room was very still. Judge Halperton said, Mr. Wexley, I am going to ask you and your client to remain seated while I confer with counsel. Bailiff, take these letters. Mr. Thorne, produce your witnesses in 10 minutes. Ezekiel Thorne bowed slightly. The room began to breathe again. Cordelia looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at Cordelia. Neither of them spoke. Ophelia Whitcomb stood up from the front row. Everyone turned. Your Honor, Mrs. Whitcomb, this is not. I am aware that this is not appropriate procedure. I am doing it anyway. I have something to say, and I would like to say it now, before the judgment, so that the community can hear it, because I would like the community to hear me say this. Judge Halperton, who was a slow, thoughtful man, looked at her. He said, Proceed briefly. Ophelia Whitcomb turned to face the room. She did not turn to face Cordelia. She turned to face the room. On the 23rd of October of last year, I was in Horace Pryor's general store. I saw Mr. Halloran being humiliated by Mr. Pryor over a tin of milk that his son needed. I looked at the floor. I have looked at the floor my whole life, when looking at anything else was going to require something of me. I am 60 years old. I do not have that many years left of the looking away habit before it becomes the entire shape of who I am. She paused. Mrs. Blackwood did not look away, and I have thought about that every day since October. And what I have thought is that I am not going to be that woman anymore. And I am telling all of you, because I would like all of you to hold me to it. She sat down. The room was silent. Then Horace Pryor stood up. He was in the back of the room, which nobody had noticed. He had come to watch, and he had been quiet. He walked forward. He stopped in the middle of the aisle. He said, Your Honor. Halperton said, Mr. Pryor, I owe Cormorant $340. Pryor said, I have been reporting to him for 8 months on Mr. Halloran's movements, on Mrs. Blackwood's affairs, on the property. He told me that if I stopped reporting, he would call in my debt and I would lose the store. Cormorant at his table did not move. Pryor continued, That morning in my store, I saw a father with 4 cents and a baby, and I looked at him. And I saw a widower, and I saw a hungry child, and I did not see them, because I could not afford to see them, because I had my own $340 problem, and it made me smaller than I want to be, and it made me cruel. In a way I did not know I could be cruel. He looked at Nathaniel. Mr. Halloran, I am sorry. That is not a word I use often. I mean it. He looked at the judge. I will testify to what I have witnessed of Cormorant's operations. I will pay my debt to him from the sale of my store, if I have to. But I will not report to him another day, and I will not lie about him another minute, on this floor or any other. He walked back to his seat. The room did not know what to do. Halperton said, "This hearing is now in recess for 1 hour. Bailiff, secured these documents. Counsel in my chambers immediately." He stood up. He left. The room began to talk. Cordelia sat at her table. Her hands were flat on the table in front of her. She was not shaking. She was calm. She was for the first time in 15 years unafraid. Nathaniel was beside her. Samuel was on his lap. Samuel was chewing on the corner of the sealed envelope because he was a baby, and that is what babies do with envelopes. Cordelia laughed. It came out of her before she had permission. Nathaniel looked at her. "What?" "Samuel is eating your father's letter." Nathaniel gently pried the envelope out of his son's mouth. "He wants his inheritance. He seems to." They laughed. Both of them, quietly, in the middle of the crowded room, in the middle of the case that was slowly turning in their favor, because they had for a moment both remembered that a baby chews on envelopes, and that the world does not entirely reorganize itself just because a fraud is being uncovered. Elias Cormorant across the room watched them laugh. He did not know what he had expected the widow and the widower to look like when they were laughing. He had not thought about it. He turned to his lawyer. He said, "Wexley." "Yes. I want to settle." "We cannot settle. We are all ready." "Wexley, I want to settle. Withdraw the filing. Return the parcel to Mrs. Blackwood in full. I will pay the court costs." "Elias, if you do that, you are admitting." "I know what I am admitting." Wexley stared at him. "Elias, my daughter is 5 Wexley. My daughter asked me last night if the woman I was taking land from was a nice woman, and I did not have an answer. I am going to give her an answer today, and the answer is that I stopped." Wexley put down his pen. "All right, Elias." The judge returned in an hour. The proceedings resumed. Wexley stood up. He announced Cormorant's withdrawal of the filing. He announced the immediate return of any claim on the North Ridge parcel. He announced Cormorant's willingness to submit to a full audit of his real estate holdings in the past decade. He announced Cormorant's intention to make voluntary restitution to any party found in that audit to have been defrauded. The room went silent. Judge Halperton said, "Mr. Cormorant, do you affirm this?" Cormorant stood. He looked first at his lawyer, then at Cordelia, then at Nathaniel, then at Prudence. "I affirm it, Your Honor, and Mrs. Blackwood. For the record, I apologize." Cordelia did not say anything. She did not have to. Halperton banged the gavel. The lease of the Northridge parcel was upheld. The purchase option was upheld. The forgery was entered into the official record. Cormorant was ordered to appear before the county prosecutor within 2 weeks to review criminal charges. His voluntary restitution was accepted as a mitigating factor. The community poured out onto Reyes Street in the April afternoon. Cordelia and Nathaniel walked out together, Samuel on Nathaniel's shoulder, Ezekiel Thorne behind them, already discussing next steps, Prudence beside her husband, Rosalind and Ophelia arm in arm. On the boardwalk they stopped. The sun was out. Cordelia turned to Nathaniel. She said, "Well." He said, "Yes." And she stood on the boardwalk of Reyes Street on a Friday afternoon in April 1889. And she looked at the man who had walked into a general store with 4 cents. And she looked at the baby on his shoulder, and she said, "Come home." They went home. 3 years later, April 1892. The orchard on the North Ridge was in full bloom. Rows of apple trees, rows of peach trees. 3 young trees at the northeast corner. Nathaniel had planted his first spring on the property, now producing. Samuel was 4. Samuel had learned that summer how to run. He had learned how to fall, how to get back up, how to fall again, how to determine from ground level whether the fall required an adult response or whether he could manage it privately with a small application of dignity. He was that afternoon running through the orchard with a wooden horse in one hand and a piece of bread in the other, both of which he was distributing at random intervals to the apple trees. Cordelia sat on the porch of the main house. She was in a rocking chair. Prudence was beside her in a second rocking chair, silver hair pinned back, hands in her lap, watching Samuel. Josephine Cade was in the far pasture working with a young mare. She had a new hire helping her, a young woman from Kansas, Josephine's cousin, who had come out west because Josephine had written to her that there was more sky here than a person could reasonably use. Fergus MacLeod was in the barn doing something he was going to complain about at dinner. Bartholomew was on the roof of the storage shed laying new shingles. Rosalind Merriweather was in the school building 2 miles down the road, teaching her Wednesday afternoon literature lesson to a class of 53 children. Ophelia Whitcomb was in the school office going over next year's budget. The Durango Railroad Workers' School had in its first 2 years become the most successful institution of its kind in the territory. It had produced its first graduating class. One of the graduates had gone to Denver on scholarship. One had apprenticed with the county telegraph office. 3 had begun to work as junior teachers in their own school. Ida Coffey, the head teacher, had married the assistant teacher the previous fall, and they had had a baby in February, whom they had named Cordelia, had noted with some private amusement, Cordelia. On the small kitchen windowsill of the main house, in a spot where the morning sun caught it every clear day, sat a dented milk tin. The label was gone. The lid had a small rust ring from where it had once been stored somewhere damp. It weighed almost nothing. Cordelia rocked slowly. Prudence rocked slowly. Samuel ran through the orchard. Nathaniel came up the path from the lower pasture. He had spent the morning fixing a section of fence. He was in his work clothes. His hair had gray in it now at the temples that had not been there 4 years ago. Prudence had noted quietly the previous month to her husband become handsome, which he had not been exactly when he had first arrived on the ridge. He had been tired then. Handsome had taken time to earn back. He climbed the porch steps. He looked at Cordelia. He kissed her forehead. He sat on the porch railing. Prudence stood up. "I am going to go start the ham." She went inside. Nathaniel watched her go. He looked at Cordelia. "You had something you wanted to tell me." "Yeah." "Well." Nathaniel. "Yeah. There is a girl. A girl. Her name is Genevieve. She's 3 years old. Her father worked for the Denver and Rio Grande Western. He died in an accident on the tracks last month. Her mother died 2 years ago. Ophelia met her at the school when we were surveying the incoming class list. She has nobody. Nathaniel was quiet. Nathaniel. Yes. I have been thinking, since Ophelia told me, about whether we could. Cordelia. I know. Cordelia. I know it is a big. Cordelia. Say something. He looked at her. He looked out at the orchard. He looked at his son, who was still distributing bread to the apple trees. He looked back at her. How long has she been? Alone. 10 days. Where is she now? With the church in Durango. When can we go get her? Tomorrow. Then let us go get her tomorrow. Cordelia looked at him. Nathaniel. Yes. Are you sure? Cordelia. I have been sure of you, of Samuel, of this house, of this ridge, for 4 years. What is one more? She began to cry. She had not cried in front of him in a long time. She did not cry loudly. She did not cry with the kind of grief that draws attention. She cried the way she had learned to cry, which was quietly, into her own hands. Nathaniel came off the porch railing. He sat on the arm of her rocking chair. He put his arm around her shoulders. He said nothing. After a while, she stopped. She wiped her eyes. She said, I did not know I still could. Could what? Do this. Again. Bring a child into this house. You said yes to Samuel. Samuel was already here. He is still here, and you are still here, and I am still here, and the house is still here. He looked out at the orchard. Cordelia, look. She looked. Samuel was running toward them, across the orchard. He had abandoned the bread. He had abandoned the wooden horse. He had spotted his father, and he was running with that lopsided, overcommitted, headlong gait that 4-year-olds use when they have identified their destination and refuse to plan for the distance. He arrived at the porch steps. He climbed them one at a time, 2-footed, because he still could not quite handle the alternating method reliably. He ran to Nathaniel. He grabbed his father's leg. He said, Papa. Yes. Ma said, we can have a baby sister. Cordelia looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at Cordelia. Prudence in the kitchen doorway put her hand over her mouth. Nathaniel picked Samuel up. He set him on his knee. He said, when did Ma tell you that? Yesterday. Did she now? She said she was going to ask you today, but that we were probably going to have a sister, so I could think about it. Cordelia said, I did not. You did, Prudence said, from the doorway. I heard you. I said we were going to talk about it. You said, Samuel, we might have a small girl coming to live with us soon. That is not the same as, that is exactly the same as to a 4-year-old. Samuel said, can I show her my horse? Nathaniel said, yes, son, you can show her your horse. Can I show her the trees? You can show her the trees. Can I show her the tin? Cordelia laughed. She could not help it. Yes, Samuel, you can show her the tin. Samuel nodded, satisfied. He climbed off Nathaniel's knee. He went back into the orchard to retrieve his abandoned bread and to continue his afternoon business. Cordelia looked at Nathaniel. He said, we are going to have a lot of Sundays like this, aren't we? She said, yes. She said, I hope so. He kissed her forehead again. He stood up. He went inside to help Prudence with the ham. Cordelia sat alone on the porch for a while. She looked at the dented milk tin on the kitchen windowsill, visible through the window from where she sat. She thought about a morning in October, the 23rd, 19 years and change since her daughter had died. 4 years since a man with a baby had walked into Pryor's general store. And she had walked to a counter, and she had asked him, "Is 2 sufficient, or would you prefer 3? She thought about Ophelia Whitcomb, who had looked at the floor and had 4 years later become the second most important administrator of a school for 53 children. She thought about Horace Pryor, who had testified at the hearing, who had lost his store briefly and gotten it back 6 months later when a group of merchants had put together a cooperative purchase and installed him as manager under conditions of full accountability, who had sold the dented milk tin at some point in the past 2 years into a general estate lot, and whom Cordelia had quietly forgiven. She thought about Elias Cormorant, who had served 8 months at the county jail and had come out of it a different man, who had sold 3 of his largest operations and used the proceeds to make restitution to 14 families he had defrauded over 20 years, who had moved with his daughter Millicent to a smaller property outside Silverton, where he was, by all reports, teaching her to ride and building her a small ranch with chickens and a room with a window. She thought about her husband Reginald, who had loved her the way steady men love, who had held her hand across a kitchen table for 27 years, and who had written a letter 10 days before he died that he had trusted to Prudence Vale. And Prudence had carried it, because Reginald had known she would, because Reginald had been the kind of man who trusted the right people to carry the right things. She thought about Beatrice. She thought about a small girl with dark curls who had lived in a cottage on this ridge for 4 years and then had gone. And she thought for the first time in a very long time that her small girl, wherever small girls go, would have liked Samuel, would have liked Genevieve, would have liked the orchard. Cordelia stood up from her rocking chair. She went inside. She helped Prudence with the ham. That evening on the porch of the main house on the North Ridge, 5 people ate dinner, and a cat with an old splint on her rear leg, long since removed, slept in a patch of the last sunlight. And on the kitchen windowsill, in the last light of an April day in 1892, a dented milk tin caught the sun. Because bad mornings, Cordelia had said to her son the previous winter, when he had asked her about the tin, are part of the record too. And she did not want to only keep the good parts. The sun set, the stars came out, the cottage light glowed briefly on the ridge as Fergus MacLeod came in from the barn and lit his lamp for the evening. And in a room off the kitchen, Samuel Halloran fell asleep in his small bed and dreamed as small boys dream about a sister he had not yet met, and about horses, and about the trees in the orchard, and about the bread he had given them. And in the bed at the top of the stairs, the bed Cordelia had shared for 4 years now, she lay awake for a little while, beside Nathaniel, who was asleep, and she listened to the wind move through the cottonwoods along the drive. And she thought about the door she had opened in October, and the door she had opened in April, and all the doors between them that had opened one by one, because a woman in a general store had asked a man with a baby, "Is 2 sufficient, or would you prefer 3? She closed her eyes. She slept, and on the ridge the orchard bloomed.